This is Hovey Smith, the Backyard Sportsman. And this pile of smoldering leaves in the background means that it's time again for us outdoor writers to continue our mucking out process. And previous years, when I've been burning leaves, I have been disposing of some of our excess stuffs. As an outdoor writer who's been at it for decades, we have accumulated a lot of junk that's really no longer usable or useful. Consequently, one year sorted through and burned all my 35mm slides, as well as many print pictures. The next year, I went through my excess pile of magazines. And now, what we're doing is going through our paper files here. We accumulated feet of them. And if you haven't walked up to your filing cabinet in a year or two, that probably means there's not very much in there that's of use to you. So I'm going through and sorting through a stack of files about yay tall and getting rid of them. About the only thing I'm keeping are paper maps. Why? Well, a lot of magazines that I wrote for once upon a time are no longer in existence. Guns and Gear, for example. Most recently, F+W Publications has gone into very serious financial considerations, and all of their individual state magazines are, at least for the moment, no longer being published. Woof. That market is gone. Why keep the contact information? If your articles were published, you have them online now. You can see anything you want. If you publish the material in a previous book, there's no need to keep all the backup material. Nobody's going to take you to court and examine you on it. So get rid of it. And now, while we got a fire going, is finally we have some rain here in Georgia, and it's wet enough that I can safely burn. I'm using this to fuel the flames. Now, all is not lost. I wrote for 10 years for Gun Digest, and I wrote about hunting with muzzleloading guns. Mike Bellevue, who formerly was a guns editor for Guns and Ammo, is now taking over the position that I had with Gun Digest, and his interest is about the guns and how they shoot and how they perform, not necessarily so much the hunting aspect of it. Certainly not to the extent that I was, which is just fine. It gives the readers of the magazine, the world's best gun book, arguably, and I think it really is, a new slant on this whole series of muzzleloading guns and related products and so on and so on and so on as they develop. And I have no doubt that Mike will do a very excellent job with it for as long as he cares to have it. So, no need to keep all this junk. No need to put it in a landfill where they're going to burn it. If you're going to burn leaves, you might as well use it as combustible material to keep your fire going. Our smoking, smoldering fire behind me is obviously working. And yet another load, and several more to come. Now, people ask me, why don't I recycle? Well, first off, here in my county, we don't have a recycling program for paper. It's too worthless to do it. The second reason is there is a lot of personal data in here. You've got your things like bank accounts, credit card numbers, blah, 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 addresses, correspondences, things you just don't want to get out in the whole world when you're throwing out a batch of files like this. Yes, you could shred it and then take it to paper recycling. And if that is what you want to do, Godspeed. Me, I'm going to do the more expedient thing, and whilst I have fire, use it. The added paper is having its intended effect, and that it is keeping that pile of leaves that had been rained on igniting and burning. And so now I can add some fresh leaves to it, and we'll consume them both together. Last of our auxiliary piles that were around the main burn pile spot are right now in front of me, so I'm making good progress. Of course, the fire is so wet and the leaves are so wet it is smoky as blazes. Now what you see being discharged is mostly water vapor. There's of course CO2 in there, as well as many other products of combustion. But almost, I'd say at least 80% of that is water vapor that you see just going back up in the atmosphere from these wet leaves. Been nice if they were a little bit drier, but we got to burn when we can, and this was the first safe burning day we have had in weeks. So I'm taking advantage of it, even though it's not absolutely optimum. The general theory of this fire for burning these wet leaves, and even now, after I've been working on them for several hours, they're still damp to the touch, and some even have free water on the surface, is you use enough combustible materials to get a hot core. And then you let that core sort of bake the top layer of leaves that you just added on for a while until they finally ultimately reach combustion temperature, and they will. It just takes longer than it would if I had a hollow cord fire with a bunch of twigs and stuff underneath it, and if the leaves, well, were just a tad drier. But I'll show you what the interior of that looks like. See, there's still unburned leaves in there, and many of them are just white hot. And most of the paper, well, there is some little bit in there, but most of it's long gone now. So now, as soon as the smoke moves around, I can put another little pile of leaves on there. This is a very variable day for winds. They're light. I was out deer hunting this morning, and it wasn't really any good, although it was good stalking weather because of the damp soils and damp leaves. But this wind is so variable that no matter which way I moved or sat, the wind was always in the wrong direction. So every deer smelt me before I got even remotely close to it. And now we have at last all of our leaves on the burn pile. Now there's still, as you see, some scattered around the pile, and these I can get with a finer rake as we go. But basically the pile is now working, and I'll just continue to work that pile back and forth until we get everything down to ash. And here comes the smoke. We've now reduced our pile here down to pretty much ash and mineral material from the paper. And by mineral material from paper, I mean calcium carbonate and kaolin clays. And these are used in filler and paper products. And this is why magazines are so heavy, and also why they're so slick, so we can get better print of colored pictures. And so some of these sheets are starting to blow a little bit, and we are starting to dry out. So as an added precaution, I've wetted the area with my hose all the way around the pile. But that pile is still plenty hot on the inside, even though it's not visibly smoking very much, and almost all the combustible material has been consumed one way or another. There's a few fragments of metal, staples, fiberglass, and that's about it. So we're going to let this cool, and I'm going to work it a couple of more times with the rake. And by the way, if you put a rake in that stuff, don't touch that rake. That rake is hot. Believe me, when it comes out of there. And ultimately, we're going to sieve it with a fine sieve if we can keep it dry, and put it out on our food plot, where it will help neutralize our acid soils, make our grain crops grow better. So even the burned residue has some practical uses. But now, this is Hovey Smith. reminding you to hunt what you eat and eat what you hunt. Be legal, be ethical, be safe. Goodbye, God bless, and get rid of some of those falls. Woof.